on belief and atheism. And this is kind of really well trodden ground, this, but I want to put a little bit of a different spin on how this question is usually addressed, because I think it's usually addressed on a technicality which in some ways detracts from perhaps what is a more interesting argument, an argument that we get a little bit more out of, I think. So that's where I want to kind of go with this. So what am I talking about? What I'm talking about is those theists who make the argument, well, yeah, my religion's a belief, but atheism is just as much a belief as is my religion. And so the kind of idea is that everything that you've thrown their way at their belief can equally be applied to your atheism, because your atheism, well, that's just a belief as well. Okay, so that's the kind of idea that I want to consider. Now, let me first let me first lay my argument, my base argument for what atheism is here. I accept, so please don't bother bringing this one, dredging this one up and taking us back to the technicality, that atheism is a lack of a belief in God, right? So all that it necessitates is a lack of belief. If you're one of the 10 people out of the 7 billion in the entire world who has never considered the proposition that a God exists, or the proposition that there is a high probability that a God exists, never thought about the concept of a God in any shape or form, never been presented with that idea, then you will lack a belief in a God or gods. You can't believe in something that you've never even considered, that you've never conceptualized. And that is what I think, that is all I think that is necessary for atheism, is a lack of belief. And if you are one of those half dozen atheists out of the 7 billion people in the world, that is all that involves, then you are an atheist, and I accept that that makes you an atheist because you don't have a belief in God. But for all the fucking rest of us, right, every other atheist that's involved has something beyond that which is strictly necessary, which is that we have considered the proposition, and we do have a propositional attitude to that proposition that God exists, or to a high probability that God exists, and we have an attitude to the proposition that God does not exist, or there is a high, the one that I go with, I believe there is a high probability that no God or gods exist. That is the proposition that I will accept, that I think best describes my position. And yes, of course, that is a belief. So why don't we look at that? Seeing as that actually applies to most atheists, even if it isn't necessarily it isn't necessary for you to be an atheist, as it applies to most atheists, surely it's something that we should actually take on board and address that argument on those grounds, not just on the grounds of what is strictly necessary technically to be regarded as an atheist. So what I want to do is then, I want to make the argument that just because it's a belief doesn't mean that the situation is symmetric. Not all beliefs are equal. And so I want to give an example, but what I want to say before I give the example is that I haven't picked the example to try to trivialize Christianity or any of the present day faiths. That isn't the purpose of the example that I'm giving. What the purpose of the example I'm giving is to show that it isn't necessarily true that a belief that something exists and the belief that that same thing does not exist are symmetric in any way, shape or form, or how we should feel about them, or the criticisms that we should make to them. So what I would say is, if you're a religious person, and this is an argument that you like to throw back at atheists, well, your atheism is just a belief. Okay, well, I'm going to tell you that I believe, okay, that orcs exist, and that goblins exist, and that wizards exist, and hobbits exist, and then deep in the bowels of the planet, that balrogs exist. So I believe effectively that the bestiary of the Lord of the Rings actually exists. Maybe the plot from the Lord of the Rings is made up, but the bestiary, all the beasts and the animals from the Lord of the Rings, all the fabulous monsters, they all actually exist in reality. That is my belief, that they exist. And I know that you, the same as anybody else with a fucking ounce of common sense, believes the opposite. You believe, let's just take the edge off that. Let's just chamfer the edge off the corner there. You believe there is a very, very high probability that these creatures do not exist. Okay, so that is your position. The point I'm trying to make is that in no way is my belief and your belief. This is not a symmetrical relationship here. For me to suggest, well, all the criticisms that apply to my belief equally apply to your belief that these creatures, that Balrogs and wizards don't exist, we can immediately see that this is not the same thing, right? Because the nature of the thing that I'm believing in is very, very different. It is qualitatively different to believing in the negation of what it is that I believe. So where does this come from? Where does this misunderstanding come from? And I think the misunderstanding comes from, in a large part, the idea that atheists are criticising belief. When atheists say we're criticising beliefs, it's a kind of shorthand for saying I'm criticising religious, God-believing faith positions. What it doesn't mean is they're criticising the idea of believing in something. After all, I believe that elephants exist, and I have no problem with saying that the belief that elephants exist is superior to the disbelief that elephants exist, the belief that elephants do not exist. I believe in Big Bang cosmology, inflationary cosmology, and the idea that today out there the universe is expanding, and it was expanding yesterday as well, by the way, and will be expanding tomorrow. I believe those things. My great-great-grandfather did not believe those things. Why? Because these ideas weren't around, though. He probably wouldn't have even considered the idea that the universe was expanding, and in any case, the prevailing ethos of the time was of a steady-state universe, and the idea of the Big Bang certainly hadn't come around at that point. So he wouldn't have believed those things. So he's a disbeliever, or at least he's a non-believer. He lacks a belief. But in no way would I suggest that my belief is inferior to his lack of belief. So when atheists criticise belief, it's not to suggest that believing in things are a bad thing. What they mean by belief is religious faith positions. So by all means call atheism a belief, and it will probably be true for the vast majority, probably every atheist you'll ever meet. While it might not necessarily be true to make you an atheist, it will be true to every atheist that you meet. But that doesn't mean the two positions are symmetrical, and what it certainly doesn't mean is the criticisms that are levelled at your faith position can be levelled at their atheism. That's pretty much what I wanted to say. That set out what I wanted to say on that. It kind of cannoned from a comment that was left on a video of mine recently, and I thought I've just heard this one for about as many times as I can stand. Well, anyway, I hope you got something out of this video. Thank you for watching, and bye for now.